Yes, thank you everyone. Welcome to Microsoft Virtual Marathon. It's been quite a lot of sessions. I'm trying to be on as many as possible, but it's been too many. So lucky we have recordings. Yes. So this session is about user onboarding, and my name is Jimmy. So remember to mark your calendar for the next SharePoint conference in Las Vegas next year. Hopefully we can travel then. Thank you to all our sponsors. Without sponsors, there won't be any conference, and without participants as yourself, there won't be any conference either. Remember the raffle. So there's a link on the raffle. So just visit the booth and watch the videos and submit your answers. And yeah, and you're up to winning some good stuff. And consider donating to our charity fund. This is I think from the organizer group. They are recommending this. All right. My name is Jimmy. I live in Oslo in Norway, and I have a role as technical architect at Rewired. I've been working with SharePoint since 2007, so it's been quite many years. And I love doing workflows and automation, so that is SharePoint Designer, if some of you remember that. And then I do a lot of Nintex before. Right now is more Flow and Power Apps, which is the hot stuff right now. So let's see how we go along with that. So I'm born in Vietnam, so I do speak Norwegian, English, and Vietnamese. So if any of you are Vietnamese and want to reach out, feel free to do so. So I'm available on LinkedIn or Twitter. Just search for my name. I think it should be quite easy to find me. It's not unique, but I think it's pretty easy to Google my name. All right, the agenda for today is some slides. So I will talk a couple of words about why we should focus on user onboarding. And then I'll show you how the thing works. And then we will discuss the technologies involved from Microsoft Forms and why we're using Microsoft Forms till where the data is stored in SharePoint Online, Flow, Azure Automation, a lot of PowerShells. So this is going to be a long session. So why do you want to do user onboarding, right? So basically, there's a couple of reasons for that, and the first reason is because as we are doing onboarding of new users, you do a lot of manually repeated tasks. Well, it depends a little bit about your IT department. If you are, having a lot of scripting done, or if you're having like a third-party tool like identity management tool, or if you are using Microsoft Identity Management tool to provision the users. Anyway, it's a task that you do a lot of times, repeating task. And that is just for the IT part of it. So we just provision the user accounts, give them the licenses, generate new passwords. But what about the other things around it, like ordering flowers for the new user, new employee, make sure that they have access to the office, ordering of IT equipment. There's a lot of things around the onboarding of a new employee that is not IT related. So that's why we will need to do onboarding, so that we save time, minimize errors, and then more or less get the same results every time. That's what we are aiming for. Yes. Right. The steps involved in this session. I had a lot more steps before, but as the technology evolves and we get more, the tools are doing more for us. I've limited the steps to fewer. So before, I think I did the session this a couple of years ago, and I had 9 steps, I think. Now it's about 7, so it's not that much, but it's something. So the first step is the input of the user information. So you got a new employee that will be starting up. You need a first name, last name, mobile numbers, which department the user will belong to, who is the manager, that kind of information you will need. So you can use different kind of tool to collect that information, right? So in this demo, I'll be using MS Forms, like Microsoft Forms. And one of the reasons why you will use Microsoft Form is because Microsoft Form can be published anonymously through the internet, so that the users, like the new employee, can fill out the form themselves without, going through their hiring managers and that kind of thing. So there's sometimes the user need to fill out some personal information that the user knows, and that's easier for the user to do that, either than email it to the hiring manager, and then they have to input that through the form. But it depends on what kind of scenario you have and how you want to do this. So in this session, form is just a way to do it. And then when the forms is submitted, we have a flow that captures the data from the forms and then add it into a SharePoint list for processing. Then the flow will then send that data to Azure Automation and generate automation tasks. And the task will then kick off a hybrid runbook. And that's something I forgot to mention, but normally when you're an enterprise with an on-premises Active Directory, and you have synchronized that to, you have an on-premises Exchange and that kind of thing, and you have a synchronized with Office 365. So all your users, internal employees, need to originate on-premises, right? So you need to create a user account in your local AD before the user account is synchronized to Office 365, and then it's ready to be used. So if you create that account directly in the cloud, you won't be able to be using your preferred domain, because that is managed by your local AD. So when you fill out the form in online, you need to send that task to creation through a hybrid worker that automation have, which basically means it is a proxy server on your internal data centers that talk to Azure through the Azure bus, and then provision the user for you. The user is then creating the local AD with the information from the user input form, and then the system will initiate Azure AD sync to provision the user to Office 365, and then you're good to go. I have a blog post in the link here describing the whole process in more detail. So if any of you want to try this yourself in your own environments, feel free to read that post. It is real details, and reach out to me if you hit any issues during the try. Yes, so right now, and the diagram for that is like this. So anyone, it can be a hiring manager, it can be the manager of the new employee, or it can be the employee themselves, fill out the onboarding form containing all the information you need: first name, last name, department, a role, whatever. And then that form is sent to Office 365 and collected into a SharePoint list. If you want to, you can send out a notification alert for the user who submit the form, telling them that you have received the input correctly. So it's up to you to expand that thing. And then that job information is sent to Azure Automation through the automation connector in Flow. And then that data is then created, sent further to the hybrid worker to create the AD account in the local AD. All right. So it contains a lot of different steps, but when you have set it up, it worked pretty well. All right. So yeah, that's all I have about slides. So let's show you have these works looks like. All right. So let's simulate that we are in SharePoint Online. We have Office 365. We have our own HR landing site. That's where you enroll new employees. So I've created a new employer registration form. This is where you input the first name. So let's say user O2 MV365 Marathon. Department is, let's say, marketing, mobile phone, whatever, and then you submit the form. That's all that needs to be done from the end user's perspective, like for the input. And as I said, since it's a form, you can share this with the new employee to fill out it themselves, and you can collect information like closest relative, this has the phone numbers and that kind of personal information that you might need before the user is enrolled correctly into the HR application or whatever other kind of thing you have. And this information is then collected and stored in a SharePoint list. And we can see this over here. Let's see. There you see the second user, user O2, has arrived in my list. That is the information I've collected. And then there is a flow running. The flow will then, there's two flow running. The first flow is collecting the data from the form, from the SharePoint form itself, from the Microsoft form. But if you're doing that in Power Apps and not Microsoft form, then you won't need that as an extra step. The user can just input directly into this employee list, and then the onboarding flow can just kick off from there. So you go into the onboarding form, and I can see that a job has been ran for 58 seconds ago, so around a minute ago. And then I can check what kind of information has been submitted. And as we can see is, take some time before the load. Okay, let's refresh. Oh, there you go. Yep. So this is the input from the SharePoint list containing the username, yeah, first name, last name, and all of that. And then whenever I built a condition here, so this is not just for onboarding. You can use this to do offboarding also. So basically, if your HR managers go in here and say that the user is no longer employee, you can do a termination of the user account also with this, with the same approach. So the flow will then create a job and send a lot of parameters to the runbook. Through the premium connector. So that is the one thing that will require a license from Flow. So that will require you a license. And then in Azure Automation, you will have an automation account with a user runbook, and that runbook will then do contain the code. I'm sorry, this is not the right one. You can use this to do the Azure ID creation also of a user account. And I have a job running. So it will contain the parameters we sent in through the flow, containing the first name, last name, departments, employee status, and all of that. And then we will see an output in the logging, telling us what the temporary password for that user will be, what the UPN is. So this is the UPN of the new user. And then there's a details logging that I've turned on. But normally when you have verified that the workbook is running as it should, you will turn off the verbose logging to be easier for yourself when you need to read this. And normally I'm having some issues with automation lately. It's not giving me the output I need in this window. Somehow I just see a black box here, but you can see that in the log whenever thing is run. I will go into details about each step a little bit closer. So in local AD, you will see the new user account has been provisioned. This is user 02, created by Azure Automation. And we can open the user account in local ID and see that it has been added into all users security group in local AD. And I'm using that group to assign Office 365 licenses in for new users. So, and there is a timer. There is a wait. So I've added a wait of 30 seconds into this job, just to wait for Azure AD Connect to be synchronized into Azure. So when everything is synchronized, you can go into Office 365 Azure ID, or the user management console, and you can check to see if that user is here or not. Is not. Why are my users not here? Okay, that's weird. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll give it a couple of more minutes and see if is eventually shows up. Let me walk you through the different flows then. The first flow is the flow collecting data from the Microsoft form, right? And that flow is schedule an action is an automatic flow, and that is quite simple. So the only thing you need is that you need to have access to that new form that you have created if you are using Microsoft Form. And then for each response, collect the responses and then create a new item into your employee list or whatever you want to call that list, right? So I will collect the title will be the first name and last name. First name will be the column, last name, department, mobile, everything else that you need to collect. You will just add that in here. And that will be creating a new elements in the employee list for every time a new account is created. So it says it's done though. I will double check that. The second one is a bit more complicated. That is the flow doing the onboarding process. So this flow here will do the hard lifting, sending the information to Azure Automation. So you will then see here, this is connected directly to that list. And the condition for this is that the status of the item is new. So if you want to do offboarding, you will need to have another condition checking that the status of the change is not new but terminated or something like that. And then earlier I had to do use a connector called HTTP connector, but after Microsoft changed that connector to a premium connector, I stopped using that connector because right now I need to buy a license anyway. So if you're buying a provisioning service account license, then you can use the automation connector because that is a lot easier to work with. So the automation, the create job in automation, you create directly job in automation. So, and if you're doing like logic apps, you will recognize this connector. So it's basically the same one. So you need to add that subscription, which resource group the runbook is running on. And then you will then have what runbook, what kind of runbook, which one of them you will run. In which automation accounts and what kind of parameter you are going to send from this list to automation. And there's one little thing here which is hidden. So it took me some time before I figured it out. But by default, the create job will only create jobs that runs in the cloud. So basically, if you're creating a user account here, it will try to run against resources online. So you have to do the hit the advanced button, and then it will come up a little choice that's called hybrid automation. So you need to choose your hybrid automation worker to run on-premises, PowerShell jobs. That's kind of cool, because if you are just creating, provisioning online resources, you can just do that in this, and it will run. And if you need to provision things on your on-premise resources, you just add a hybrid worker into the job, and that will provision the user. Let me go back here, and then I've never ever have an error in this job, except from the first moment when you try to test this. After you set it up, it normally runs by itself. Let me double check to see what kind of parameters. 8 minutes ago. So here. So this is the this job, and it just sends the data from it. So it is not waiting for the job to finish or doing any complex stuff. So it just sends the job and it's done. So it's pretty stable. Never had an error with that at all, actually. Right, and then you go to your Azure ID, go into your resource group automation account, figure your runbook, and then you get you create a new PowerShell runbook. So when you create a runbook, I think there's a couple of good blogs about which kind of type, but I prefer to do it through PowerShell because somehow I feel like I have more control. But that's my kind of thing. So I have, for example, here a runbook creating an Azure AD account. So that account is purely a cloud-only account. But this runbook here is creating a local AD account. So that is a local account. So the one thing you will need to, for example, in another scenario, if you have a lot of guest users in your tenant and you want to have a control of how guest users invited into your tenant and how they are provisioned and that kind of thing, you can do that kind of thing. You can, you can write a PowerShell code to create that guest account in Azure AD and then send the invitation and do all the kind of logic around that. It's pretty cool. And the job completed, so it should look good. Yeah, so let me show you the code. The code is pretty, I was about to say simple. It's not simple, but it's really low code. So I've tried to write it up the way that it's easy to understand. But the first thing you need is you'll need the parameters for the rest of the code to run, right? So you'll need the first name, last name, mobile phone, department, all of that. And if you want to extend this, you can do managers. You can do this user should inherit the same permissions that another user have. You can also do that for easier transition to group memberships around your tenant. And then I've created a lot of different kind of functions here to do different kind of thing during the creation process. So this one function here is called update list, and what it does is that it just update the the SharePoint list whenever the process fail or complete. It just writes the status into that list for easier consumption and troubleshooting. And then this is the try and catch for easy error management. So if employment status is new, look at that path in local AD. So that is the UO where the employees will be created into, right? So that's the path. And then I will generate a temporary password. It depends on how you want to do this, but yeah, so it really don't need to be that complex, or you can do a lot of things in PowerShell to generate a really complex passwords, but I don't feel the need for it though, because MFA will be turned on by default. And this here contains the parameters for the new service account. So for example, what is the same account name? So we have first name, last name, user principal name, which is equal to your email address. So that is also a condition for that. And the replace code is just used to replace all manner of, special characters and empty spaces in email addresses, that kind of thing. It just remove all of that. Yeah, and then you can set change password at login requirement if you want it or not. And for that, there's a catch though. So if you set that toggle to true, local AD will require the user first time sign in to change the password. That won't work if the user try to sign in first time in the cloud. They need to sign in locally first, and then everything will be provisioned. I haven't tried this scenario with AD Premium where you can have password reset in the cloud problem backwards. So I haven't tried that yet, but I think that will work if you have all of that in place. And then the description of the user if you need to. So this is my description just for demo purposes, just to make sure that it is there. And then if the account is enabled or not, and where this account should be created. And then I have some output just to troubleshooting during the run, just to see if the account is completed or that kind of thing. So, and this is a local AD commandlet. A new AD user is a local AD commandlet. This means that the service account doing this need to have permission to create user account in your local AD. So I have some comments on that. And then updating the list item if you want, again, doing a status of things. And then I'm just hard coding the URL here. You can do, you can have that as a parameter also from Flow, but really it really doesn't have any. It doesn't matter because that list won't be changing every day. So for this scenario, that I can just hard code that list in here. And if you have local exchange, you will need to do some extra provisioning of that mail address in your local exchange before it gets provisioned correctly into Office 365. So it is like, so beware of that. If you have local exchange that is in hybrid with Office 365, you need to provision the remote mailbox, what do we call it? Attribute in exchange for the user account before it's synced up to the AD. And the next code, line of code, add that user into this group. That is a security group in local AD. Right? And then I've add a sleep for 60 seconds. And the reason for that is because we've seen that is a delay sometimes. So just and of course, you can write a code to poll, to poll check. But for this kind of, I've seen that it's pretty fast. So 60 seconds is more than enough. So 30 will be working also. And then I start the importing the module for Azure AD Sync. And then I start a Delta Sync. And I'll wait again for 30 seconds for the Delta Sync to complete to Azure AD. Yeah, so what I've seen is that if your hybrid worker is installed on a separate machine than your Azure AD Sync and your Exchange, you need to add remote PowerShell permission to the service account before everything will run as it should go. And here I have employment status. If it's terminated, then the user account is disabled and removed, and then move into another URL in local AD. So it's kind of things you can do further on if you need to. And if there's any errors, the list will be updated with error occurred, and then I will get an exception to troubleshoot. I've run this in a couple of clients, and the times when this has failed has been related to Exchange not running or permission of the user account or some security update or that kind of thing. So hasn't been that much error on that front though, but that's where I've seen some issues. It's related to the permission the account need to run this. So as you can see in the code here, there's no user account or password being passed through this code. So basically, I've encrypted the credentials in a variable in automation and that can be done using certificates or just credentials. So this is my automation credentials, and this is the password. So this is stored in as a credential in Azure Automation. So the runbook just use this. So we are not running. So we are not having any password variables in the runbook at all. And you can. I'm trying to do some of this with app principles. I'm hitting some permission stuff. And then you can also use a certificate to authenticate with Azure AD and local AD also. I think I haven't tried that with the local AD. So basically, it runs pretty well with the user account. Yeah. So that is that. Let's see. I have a lot of time. Let's see if this thing here shows up. Yep, there my user account is here. Maybe I missed it just earlier. But you can see that the user 1 and user 2 here has been synchronized through Azure AD. And you see the license has been assigned. So user 2 has been assigned Office 365 E3 developers. So if I want to try that, I can go into new private window. And I just sign into office.com. And I do the right. Yeah, so I'm having a weird mail alias. And that's because I don't have Exchange on premises. So I could not set the I couldn't set that thing. So that's fine. So let me log in using that account. And where is my 10 password? It's always a thing, right? So go in here and let's check that job. And there is where is that job? Maybe this one. Yep, there is the password. There you go. Don't need to be signed in. There you go. So that is me. User 02 at Microsoft Virtual Marathon. And then Exchange will work. And the licensing has been assigned. So that will be fine. Cool. So that is the hard part of it. I mean, to make sure that the data is transferred to your form to Azure AD, then the account is created and the license has been assigned. And then you need to do some extension to the form, to the employee list. You will then need to create some extra flows if you want to extend that to do ordering the flowers, make sure that ordering access to the building is done, and all of that matter of things like warning. You can have like when the user will start as a variable, for example, and then you can expand that as you see fit. And you can also, use this as a base and create a Power App above it to do an onboarding app if you really need to. If you don't have any HR application, or your HR application is old, or your HR application don't have any integration with your local AD or Office 365. So this is a way to do it. It's low code. Saves a lot of time. It really don't cost anything at all, because The only thing you'll need as a resource here is you need to pay for the Azure, no, the Azure Premium Connector in Flow, which I don't remember. The cost of that is $15 a month for that one user with that one license. And then you need to have a local server running the hybrid role, and you probably have 1 or 2 servers running nothing or having a resource left, so you can use those. Otherwise, you already paid for the licenses. You already paid for SharePoint. You already paid for automation. Is you got I think 100 minutes free automation runs in Azure Automation every month. And for all the clients I've been deployed this at, they haven't received any bill from Microsoft based on the runbook for this job. There's like it takes about a couple of minutes before the job is done. So at the max they get like 5 Norwegian crowns, and that's $50 a month for this. So it's not like you're employing 100 people every month, so that will incur some costs, but for the most part of the time it's really it'll be fine, right? All right, so let me show you also. I have some minutes left, a lot of minutes left actually. I think I'm talking quite fast. Let's go back here. So I'm using in my earlier demo, I did the licensing through PowerShell also. To add uses a license and then remove some of the things in the license package. But I figured out that it is easier to do license assignments through groups, group license assignments. So when you provision a local security group in your local AD and provision that into Azure, you can assign a license packet to that group in Azure, and you can then turn on and off things that you want the user to do or not to do. So for example, I turn off Sway, I turn off Kasala. I don't understand Kasala. My analytics, I really don't need that. So this is the kind of thing you can do, right? It makes a lot easier. You just need to make sure that the total amount of of licenses is up to date as you go along. And then when you do the offboarding, you need to make sure the user account is then disabled and removed from the user, the licensing group. That way you can save a lot of time managing licenses between new users and users who have left, and you forgot to remove the license and all of that kind of things. So you will save a lot of time if you do if you automate that process though, and that will save you a lot of errors also. So we all been there, like a new employee arrives and we don't have any license left. So you need to figure out who has left and then disable that user and remove the license and do all of that. So good. So that is the last bit of that. So let me recap a little bit before I have, I have 10 minutes for the Q&A. Let me have some, okay, let's see. All right, some key takeaways though. Yes, so because in order to make this to work, we need to use a service account. Well, I need to use a service account. Maybe we can do it otherwise, but for this session, we need a service account. And that service account need a Flow license based on the premium connector for Azure Runbook. Yeah, and that will occur a cost of, I think, $15 a month. The service account need permission to do remote PowerShell to the different servers in your environment on premises. So normally Exchange is another machine, and your Azure AD Sync is another one, and your hybrid worker is another one. So the PowerShell need to be running on that hybrid worker, but it's invoking different kind of tools, different kind of command lists based on if it's doing Exchange stuff or it's doing Azure AD stuff. And make sure MFA is enabled. Well, it's enabled for your tenants, but you need to exclude the service account. And there's currently, well, I haven't figured out a good way to do this. So what I've been using is Azure Conditional Access. So normally when you deploy MFA, you exclude the office location, network location from the MFA rules, so that whenever you are in the office and you sign into Office 365, you don't need to, use MFA. But if you're outside of the company, outside the company network and trying to sign into Office 365, you need to use MFA. So that is a workaround to make sure that the service account is protected, but at the same time have the correct, permission authentication to run the job is to do in Azure. Obviously, we want this to be running in the backend, so we don't need to. Monitor it or do manual approval on this. So be aware of that. I mean, until there is a better way, I've found out that is acceptable thing to do, like protecting that service account in your on premises, in your local environment. That is more or less the same as you do today if you have automated tasks doing on your local environments, right? So just make sure to exclude that service account from MFA policy if you have one. Otherwise, it will fail authentication to Office 365 and the thing will fail. Right? Yes. All right, I'm ready to take on any questions if there's any. I'll try to answer them as best as I could. And thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, for Q&A, we had a question concerning Azure Automation, which needs an Azure AD Premium license.
No, you don't.
Do you confirm?
Yeah, you don't need that. So Azure Automation is just extra service. So you do need pay as you go or a subscription. You do need that, but the cost of running automation is very low, almost free. So you don't need Azure AD Premium. You just need an automation service, which is a separate service in Office 365 in Azure anyway.
Okay, the second question that we have is from someone which is anonymous, and unfortunately, are there any major differences in how you would set this in a cloud-only environment?
No. So the only difference is the what should we say? The hybrid worker. Well, that's the first difference. You don't need a hybrid worker. And the second difference is that it is a bit harder to protect the service account if you're running with service account. So in that case, I will recommend you to do with app provisioning. Because when the code need to create an account, it need permission to Azure AD to actually create accounts, and that permission is given to either the service account running it or the app principal running it. So if you're running in the cloud, do that with an app principal and then delegate the permission through Graph. What I've seen is that you can basically do all of that using Flow. So you really don't need to do it through automation. You can do all of that in Flow. And Flow have what we call an Azure AD connector. But the thing with Flow is that Flow has to be run in context of a service account. So I will prefer to send a request from Flow because I can protect that account, but that can be run by an app principal in Azure Automation or a Logic app and that kind of thing. So make sure you think about the protection of the service account, because that account or app principal will have a lot of permission in order to be able to create resources in Azure AD, right? Yes. Hopefully that is an answer.
Yes, Jimmy, I'm pretty sure that's okay. So far, we don't have any more questions. Perhaps we can wrap up with the last portion of your slide set about feedbacks and.
Yes. So thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me through LinkedIn, Twitter, or that kind of thing. We have 2 feedbacks, what we call it, QR code here. So we'll be grateful if you can have a couple of minutes to give us feedback about the conference and about my performance here. It's always room for improvement. Thank you for joining us today.